This is a hobby author publishing presentation, where my hobby is your entertainment.
Welcome back to Shadows of Secrets. With the legendary thief Ace Stonebeard at his side, Gerrod's fight against the Shadow Myster has a new, sharper edge. But the Myster's web is wider and darker than they knew. An impossible theft has shaken the city's elite, a heist accomplished with magic that defies explanation. The whispers in the underworld speak of a new, terrifying agent. Today, in Chapter 7, Whispers of the Temptress, our heroes follow the trail of stolen magic into the city's grimiest corners, only to discover that the Myster's greatest weapon may be a foe they are completely unprepared to face.
Chapter 7, Whispers of the Temptress. The Laughing Wolf's interior hit them like a physical blow, all noise, heat, and staggering sensory assault. Tallow candles cast sickly yellow light across scarred wooden tables where patrons hunched over drinks and whispered conversations. Smoke hung in thick layers, stinging Gerrod's eyes as he scanned the room with practiced caution. "Keep your hood up," Ace murmured, barely audible above the cacophony. "Elf blood's a rare sight in this rat's nest." Gerrod nodded almost imperceptibly, moving deeper into the tavern. His forest-trained senses struggled to parse the overwhelming inputs. The reek of unwashed bodies, spilled ale souring on warped floorboards, and something more sinister underneath it all. A serving girl with hollow eyes brushed past, her sleeve deliberately catching Ace's arm. She continued without breaking stride, but Gerrod noticed the small fold of parchment now nestled in the dwarf's palm. "Still got the touch," Ace smirked, guiding them toward a shadowed corner table. "Some folk remember the old days." They settled with their backs to the wall, positioned to observe the entire room. Ace discreetly unfolded the note beneath the table, while Gerrod ordered 2 ales from a passing server with a voice carefully stripped of elven inflection. "Well?" Gerrod asked once they were alone again. Ace's expression darkened. "Says our friends expected. 2nd floor, red door." His calloused thumb traced the crude drawing at the bottom of the note. "Shadow Myster's mark." "A trap?" "Most certainly," Ace growled, tossing back his ale. "Question is, who's hunting who?" Gerrod didn't answer immediately, his gaze sweeping past Ace to the tavern's entrance. "Hold on," he said softly, his voice low. "Something else is happening." The low rumble of conversations around them momentarily stilled as the tavern door swung open. A trio of city watch officers strode in, their Black Hawk emblems gleaming even in the dim light. Unlike the drunkard outside, these men moved with purpose, their hands resting meaningfully on sword hilts. "Patrols don't usually bother with this place," Ace whispered, his dark eyes narrowing as he watched the guardsmen corner the barkeep. Something stirred the nest. Gerrod tilted his head slightly, his elven hearing catching fragments of their heated exchange. 4th break-in this month. Duke's collection this time. Witnesses claim impossible entry. The half-elf leaned closer to Ace. "The arcane collection at the Duke's estate. It's been breached." Ace's bushy eyebrows shot up. "That place is locked tighter than a virgin's." "The Blackwood staff and the orb of Maelwyn are missing," Gerrod interrupted, his voice tight. "Ancient artifacts of considerable power." The dwarf whistled softly. "No common thief pulls that off. Those vaults have wards even I couldn't crack." Around them, the tavern buzzed with whispered speculation. Gerrod caught the flash of coins changing hands, information being bought and sold like market goods. "Too clean," Ace muttered. "No bodies, no witnesses, no magical residue. Guild work, but better than most." Gerrod's fingers traced a pattern on the worn tabletop. "Not the Shadow Myster's usual approach." "No," agreed Ace, a glint of professional admiration in his eyes. "This is specialized. Someone new in his web." Their eyes met across the table, understanding passing between them. The Shadow Myster was expanding his reach, from common street crime to high-value arcane theft. They had found their lead. Gerrod leaned slightly closer. "These specialists, the kind who can bypass wards like that," he murmured. "Where do we find out about someone like that in this city?" Ace's lips curved into a knowing, almost humorless smile. "Whispers like those don't float around polite society, Elf," he responded. pushing back from the table. Time to visit a different kind of establishment. I know just the place. The rusty mug crouched at the edge of Oswagonia's harbor like a diseased beast, its weathered timbers blackened by decades of salt spray and neglect. Compared to the Laughing Wolf, this establishment made no pretense at respectability. The stench of fish guts, stale beer, and unwashed sailors hung in the air like a physical presence. "Keep your mouth shut and follow me lead," Ace growled, adjusting his posture into the familiar slouch of a dock worker. These are Meister's street-level thugs, not the sharpest blades in the armory, but dangerous all the same. Gerrod nodded, pulling his hood lower. Even in the fading twilight, his elven features would draw unwanted attention here. The half-elf felt acutely out of place, his connection to the natural world muted by the overwhelming human presence of the docks. They slipped inside without ceremony. The tavern's interior was a chaotic tableau of grimy sailors, off-duty laborers, and hard-faced men whose occupations were best left unmentioned. A three-stringed lute played discordantly in one corner, barely audible above the din of shouted conversations and occasional breaking glass. Ace moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his dwarven stature an advantage in the press of bodies. Gerrod followed closely, noticing how his friend's eyes darted between faces, cataloging threats with the precision of his thieving days. "There," Ace murmured, jerking his chin toward a table near the back. "The one with the scarred eye. Boric, used to run collections for the Northwestern Territory." Gerrod studied the man. "An old associate?" Ace's lips tightened beneath his beard. "More like someone who owes me for not slitting his throat when I had the chance." The tavern's atmosphere prickled against Gerrod's skin like the warning before a lightning strike. As they approached the bar, conversations faltered and died, leaving only the creaking of wooden beams and the distant lapping of harbor waters against the pilings below. Rough men with scarred faces and calloused hands paused mid-drink to assess the newcomers, their gazes lingering on Gerrod's concealed form with predatory interest. "Eyes down," Ace whispered through clenched teeth. "They can smell fear like wolves." The barkeep, a mountain of a man with arms thick as tree trunks and a face like crumpled parchment, glowered as they approached. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to jaw, pulling his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Two of whatever's cheapest," Ace grunted, tossing a few tarnished coins onto the sticky counter. He matched the barkeep's scowl with practiced ease, his posture suggesting a man accustomed to violence. The barkeep's eyes flicked between them, lingering suspiciously on Gerrod's hooded figure before snatching up the coins. He slammed down 2 wooden tankards of murky brown liquid that smelled more of river water than ale. Gradually, the hum of conversation resumed around them, though Gerrod noted several patrons still watching from the corners of their eyes. He lifted the tankard to his lips without drinking, mimicking the rhythms of the other customers while his keen senses cataloged potential threats. Across the room, Boric leaned back in his chair, absently fingering the hilt of a curved dagger at his belt. His single eye narrowed as it settled on Ace's back. Ace shifted his weight, angling his stocky frame to better hear the table behind them. To casual observers, he appeared to be just another dock worker nursing cheap ale, but his dark eyes missed nothing. The dwarf had spent decades perfecting this art, becoming invisible while remaining perfectly aware. "Seemed impossible," a voice muttered nearby. "Duke's got wizard locks on everything." "New blood," another voice replied. "Meister's brought in specialists." Gerrod watched his friend work, marveling at the transformation. Gone was the gruff companion who'd traveled beside him, replaced by a shadow from Ace's former life. The dwarf's fingers drummed an irregular pattern on the tankard, an old thieves' guild signal that meant information flowing. A server brushed past, and Ace subtly tilted his head toward a corner table where 3 men huddled in intense conversation. Their weapons, finer than most in this establishment, gleamed dully in the tavern's poor light. "Collection tonight?" Ace mumbled into his drink. "Harbor Master's shipment." The half-elf gave no indication he'd heard, maintaining his facade of disinterest. But beneath his hood, Gerrod's keen eyes traced the path from their position to the door, calculating escape routes should things turn violent. Across the room, Boric's scarred face contorted into a frown as his gaze settled on them again. The enforcer leaned forward, whispering something to his companions that made them all turn and stare. They'd been noticed. Ace leaned back against the bar, adopting the posture of a man with nowhere better to be. He tilted his tankard slightly, creating the appearance of drinking while keeping his senses sharp. The dwarf's ears, though not as keen as Gerrod's, had been honed by years in the criminal underworld to pick out valuable whispers from tavern noise. "Never seen anything like it," came a hushed voice from Borik's table behind them. "Pass through solid stone, they say." "Horseshit," another voice countered. "No one gets past those wards." "Tell that to the Duke," Borik, the first voice, insisted. "Blackwood staff's gone, ain't it?" Ace caught Gerrod's eye briefly, a fractional nod confirming he was catching the conversation. The half-elf gave no sign of acknowledgement, his hooded face turned toward his untouched ale. "Myster's mighty pleased," a third voice added, slurring slightly. "Paid double the usual rate." "Aye, but he's confused too. Wasn't his regular crew that did it." "Magic users," the first voice muttered with undisguised contempt. "Bringing them in now. Bad business." "Bad for us, you mean?" the second man laughed without humor. "Can't compete with sorcery." A heavy silence fell over their table, broken only by the sullen gulping of ale. Ace shifted slightly, catching fragments of their continued conversation. Foreign woman, Eastern accent, unnatural talents, before they lowered their voices further. The dwarf's weather-beaten face remained impassive, but his mind raced. The Shadow Myster had recruited outside help for this theft, someone with magical abilities beyond the local talent. Someone who could bypass wards that would have stopped even him in his prime. The hunt had just become more complicated. Ace's attention sharpened as the conversation at the next table grew heated. A burly man with a split ear slammed his fist down, sending Al sloshing over the rim of his tankard. "Wasn't right," Split Ear growled. "Meister's orders were clear. Bring 'em straight to the rookery." "Not our call," his companion muttered, a thin man with nervous eyes that constantly scanned the room. "Orders changed." "Since when does Hadreth countermand the Meister?" Gerrod remained perfectly still, though Ace caught the subtle tilt of his head. The half-elf was listening intently now. "Keep your voice down, fool." "My," the third man hissed, leaning forward. "All I know is the witch said delivery point changed. Hand off at the old temple ruins instead." Split Ear spat on the floor. "Don't trust it. Artifacts that valuable should have gone straight to him." "You questioning the Meister's judgment?" the thin man asked, his hand drifting toward a concealed blade. "I'm questioning why we're doing handoffs with outsiders," Split Ear retorted. "Foreign witch shows up? Suddenly we're changing protocols?" "Coin spends the same?" The third man shrugged, ending the conversation. Ace drained his ale, giving Gerrod a meaningful look. The information was clear. The stolen artifacts had been diverted from their intended destination. Someone within the Shadow Meister's organization was working with this witch, possibly without the Meister's knowledge. The dwarf placed his empty tankard on the counter with deliberate care. The temple ruins lay outside the city walls, isolated and perfect for betrayal. The thin man leaned closer, his breath sour with cheap ale, voice dropping to a barely audible rasp. "Don't you go mentioning her name lightly, Borik. Bad luck follows." Split Ear bristled, but the bravado seemed hollow. "Who? The witch? The one who took the goods?" The third man nervously polished his dagger hilt on his tunic. "They call her the Temptress." He practically spat the name, yet the sound carried a strange weight, a blend of reverence and raw terror that hung heavy in the air. The surrounding noise of the tavern seemed to recede, leaving their hushed words stark against the creaking timbers and the mournful lute. "Aye," Split Ear muttered, his gaze dropping to the scarred tabletop. "Handles the Meister's tricky stuff. Things that whisper in the dark, artifacts that don't like being touched." The thin man nodded vigorously, eyes wide. "Heard she talks to shadows. Seen a man cross her once, just gone, like he never was." Ace felt a cold knot form in his gut, a sensation familiar from his darkest days in the guilds. This wasn't the work of common thugs or hired muscle. The Shadow Myster had allied himself with someone possessing powers that transcended mere blades and locks. Gerrod's stillness beside him intensified, the ranger's gaze fixed on the enforcers, processing this new, dangerous variable. The stolen artifacts weren't just diverted. They were in the hands of a specialist feared even by the Meister's own hardened men. the Temptress. The name itself felt like a curse whispered on the foul harbor wind. Gerrod remained outwardly impassive, a hooded statue amidst the tavern's grime and clamor. Yet beneath the cowl, his senses, usually attuned to the rustle of leaves or the snap of a distant twig, strained against the oppressive weight of human fear. The name, the Temptress, spoken low and tight, cut through the background din like a sharp shard of ice. It wasn't just a name. It was an incantation, carrying the palpable weight of dread and grudging awe from the hardened men who uttered it. He felt the subtle shift in the air, the way the already tense atmosphere coiled tighter, thicker, as if the very shadows in the corners deepened at the mention of her. Even the stale scent of ale and fish seemed momentarily eclipsed by a colder, sharper tang, the scent of unnatural power, perhaps, or simply the metallic edge of terror. His mind, accustomed to tracking natural predators, analyzed the enforcers' reactions. Their fear wasn't born of simple respect for a superior. It was primal, superstitious. This Temptress wasn't merely an agent. She was a force, likely the linchpin for operations beyond the scope of common thuggery, like the impossible theft of the Duke's artifacts. The whispers of magic, the handling of sensitive acquisitions, it coalesced into a chilling certainty. She was central to the Shadow Myster's more esoteric and dangerous ambitions, a hidden player whose influence cast a long, unnerving shadow over their investigation. Her name, now etched in his memory, marked a significant escalation in the threat they faced. While Gerrod processed the name's arcane resonance, Ace's reaction was grounded in the harsh pragmatism of the underworld. He knew names like the Temptress. They weren't given at birth. They were earned. Forged in shadows and blood, whispered warnings passed between thieves and killers. It spoke of specialization, of a reputation carefully cultivated and ruthlessly maintained. Temptress, not the butcher or the hammer. It suggested subtlety, manipulation, perhaps illusion or mind-bending arts, skills far removed from the straightforward brutality of enforcers like Boric. Ace took another slow sip of the foul ale, the taste barely registering. His mind, a labyrinth honed by years of navigating treacherous alliances and hidden threats, cataloged the implications. The raw fear in the enforcer's eyes wasn't just respect for a boss's favorite. It was the deep-seated dread reserved for forces beyond their understanding. Forces that could erase a man without leaving a trace. This wasn't just some skilled operative following orders. This was likely an independent contractor, someone the Shadow Myster employed for jobs requiring finesse and perhaps a touch of the unnatural, someone dangerous enough to potentially operate with her own agenda. The pieces clicked into place with grim certainty. The impossible vault breach, the stolen artifacts glowing with arcane power, the hushed whispers of a foreign witch, it all pointed to her. This Temptress was the specialist, the key to the high-profile theft, and a far more unpredictable and deadly adversary than the Meister's usual thugs. Dealing with her wouldn't be like cracking a safe or bypassing a guard patrol. This was wading into deeper, darker waters. The thin man shivered, despite the tavern's oppressive heat, rubbing his arms as if warding off a sudden chill. Never saw her face clear, he admitted, voice still hushed. Always cloaked, you know? Dark fabrics that seemed to drink the light. He swallowed hard. But the way she moves. Split Ear nodded slowly, his one good eye distant. Eye, like smoke on the water, silent, barely disturbs the air. 1 minute she's there, the next, just shadows. He traced a pattern in spilled ale on the table. Saw her deal with that fool Marco tried to skim from the delivery last month. Didn't even draw a blade. The third man leaned in conspiratorially. Heard she just looked at him, and he started screaming, couldn't stop. He shuddered, the sound grating in the sudden quiet around their table. They found him days later, curled up in the bilge of some abandoned barge, babbling nonsense, mind gone. Ace felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. Smoke and shadows, a gaze that shattered minds. This wasn't just skill, it was something else, something deeply unsettling. He'd known deadly operators, men and women who killed with ruthless efficiency, but this description hinted at a power that transcended physical prowess. It spoke of control, of an insidious deadliness wrapped in grace. Gerrod listened, his gaze unreadable beneath his hood. The description resonated with his ranger senses, not of forest creatures, but of something inherently unnatural. Movement like smoke suggested more than stealth. It hinted at an ability to manipulate perception, perhaps even reality itself. Deadly if crossed. The enforcer's fear wasn't merely caution. It was stark terror born from witnessing something they couldn't comprehend, let alone fight. The Temptress was indeed a creature of shadow and illusion. The third man wiped sweat from his brow, despite the relative cool near the tavern door. "Just glad I ain't got to report to her direct," he muttered, glancing nervously over his shoulder again. "Wouldn't go near her usual haunts if you paid me double." Split Ear grunted in agreement. "That place gives me the creeps anyway, especially after dark." Ace leaned forward almost imperceptibly, straining to catch the location amidst the background clatter. His knuckles were white where they gripped the rough wood of the tankard. The thin man shuddered again. "Saw Boren's boy hanging around there last week, asking questions." He lowered his voice further, the words barely audible. "Haven't seen the lad since." He traced a shape on the damp table. "Down by the old silk market, you know? That God's forsaken patch that never got rebuilt after the fire." Split Ear nodded grimly. "Aye, the deep alcove back behind the Weaver's Guild ruins, where the shadows pool thickest, even at noon." He spat on the floor. "Place feels wrong. Always has. Perfect spot for her kind of business, I suppose." Gerrod's gaze sharpened beneath his hood. The Silk Market ruins. An alcove where shadows lingered. It was a precise location, offered freely, wrapped in the casual fear of men who knew better than to trespass. He felt Ace shift beside him. The subtle movement signaling the dwarf had also logged the crucial detail. They hadn't found the artifacts yet, nor the Myster, but they had found a thread leading directly to the mysterious Temptress, a shadowed corner in a forgotten part of the city, pulsing with quiet menace. The hunt had a destination. Split Ear pushed his empty tankard away with a scraping sound that made the thin man jump. "Don't mean she's there now?" he cautioned, misinterpreting the sudden stillness from Ace and Gerrod's direction as interest in confronting the Temptress. "She ain't got no schedule. Comes and goes like a bad dream." The third man nodded emphatically. "One week, she's orchestrating deals down by the docks. The next, she's vanished for a month. Myster himself probably don't know where she beds down." "But," the thin man added, lowering his voice again, his eyes darting around the room, "that alcove, the Silk Market spot, that's different. That's where the big stuff happens. The kind of exchanges you don't do out in the open, not even in the river ward." He nervously licked his lips. "Word is, if something truly valuable changes hands, something the Myster wants kept quiet even from his own lads, that's where she surfaces." Ace absorbed this nuance. Unpredictable, yes, but with known anchor points tied to the significance of the transaction. Like a spider, she moved erratically across her web but returned to specific junctions for crucial moments. The stolen artifacts, the Blackwood staff, the Orb of Maelwyn, certainly qualified as big stuff. Gerrod processed the information, filtering it through his understanding of predator patterns. Even the most elusive creatures revisit favored hunting grounds or dens. The Silk Market alcove wasn't just a meeting place. It was a locus of power for her, a place where her influence was concentrated during high-stakes moments. While her general movements were chaotic, the gravity of the recent theft suggested the alcove was their most promising lead for encountering the Temptress, or, at the very least, finding traces of her passage. With the crucial location whispered between fearful breaths, the air around the enforcer's table seemed to settle back into stale normalcy. The immediate danger of speaking her name had passed, replaced by the usual drunken murmurs and the rhythmic clatter of tankards. Ace drained the last dregs of his foul ale, the bitter taste lingering on his tongue like the unsettling information they'd gleaned. He placed the wooden mug back on the sticky counter with a soft, deliberate thud, a final punctuation mark to their eavesdropping. Beside him, Gerrod mirrored the action, his own tankard still mostly full. The half-elf rose fluidly from his stool, the movement economical and silent, melting back towards the tavern entrance. Ace followed, his shorter strides surprisingly quiet on the grimy floorboards, weaving through the knots of drinkers without jostling a soul. Years spent navigating crowded thieves' dens had ingrained the necessary caution. No one gave them a second glance. The brief flicker of interest their entrance had caused had long since died down, drowned in cheap alcohol and petty grievances. They were just two more nondescript figures swallowed by the tavern's gloom. The heavy wooden door groaned softly as Gerrod eased it open, letting in a sliver of the fading twilight and the damp, salty tang of the harbor air, a welcome contrast to the oppressive stench within. They slipped out as unobtrusively as they had entered, the raucous noise of the rusty mug fading behind them like a bad memory. The cobblestones of the dockside alley felt solid beneath their boots, the relative quiet broken only by the distant cry of gulls and the lapping water. They paused for a moment, letting their eyes adjust, the shared weight of their newfound knowledge. The Temptress, the silk market alcove, settling between them in the growing darkness. The harbor sounds receded behind them, replaced by the echoing click of their boots on increasingly cracked paving stones. They moved swiftly through the labyrinthine alleys, leaving the raucous energy of the riverward for quieter, more derelict streets. Twilight bled into true night, swallowing the remnants of the sunset, and the few sputtering lanterns cast islands of anemic light in a sea of deepening gloom. Buildings loomed taller here, leaning inwards as if sharing secrets, their empty windows like vacant eyes staring down. The air grew heavier, losing the salty tang of the harbor, replaced by the cloying scent of damp rot, stagnant water in choked gutters, and the dust of ages undisturbed. Gerrod moved with the silent grace of a forest predator, his head tilted slightly, senses absorbing the subtle shifts in the urban landscape. He noted the absence of typical city sounds, fewer voices, no distant music, only the scuttling of rats in the walls and the mournful sigh of wind whistling through collapsed rooftops. Even the ubiquitous city watch seemed to avoid this decaying quarter. Ace walked beside him, his usual gruff commentary silenced, his hand never straying far from the reassuring weight of the axe handle beneath his cloak. The dwarf's steps were measured, his sharp eyes scanning rooftops and shadowed doorways with ingrained suspicion. The knowledge of the Temptress, of her power, and her preferred haunt hung between them, an unspoken weight amplifying the oppressive atmosphere. Every flicker of movement in the periphery, every unexplained noise seemed charged with potential menace. The silk market ruins were close now, and the very air felt thick with anticipation, vibrating with the ghost of forgotten commerce and the unnerving potential of what or who awaited them in the shadowed alcove where deals were struck and people disappeared. They turned a corner onto a wider, rubble-strewn street that marked the edge of the old silk market district. Skeletal remains of burned-out buildings clawed at the night sky, silhouetted against the faint starlight. Here, the silence was deeper, broken only by the whisper of wind through empty window frames and the crunch of debris underfoot. The oppressive weight they'd felt earlier intensified, pressing down like a physical force. Gerrod suddenly halted, holding up a hand, palm flat. Ace stopped instantly, his own senses going on high alert, scanning the immediate surroundings. But Gerrod wasn't looking nearby. His gaze, sharp even in the near-total darkness, was fixed on the deeper shadows pooling beneath a collapsed archway 50 yards ahead. "We're observed," Gerrod breathed, his voice barely a whisper, stripped of its usual elven cadence, becoming purely functional. Ace squinted into the gloom, his dwarven eyes less effective at this range. "Where?" "See nothing but rubble." "Two figures," Gerrod clarified, his eyes tracking minute movements invisible to Ace. "Against the north pillar of the arch, too still, trying to blend with the stone." He tilted his head. "And another, rooftop, second building on the left. Glint of metal, reflected starlight off a crossbow bolt, perhaps." Ace cursed under his breath, his hand tightening on his axe. Informants, sentries. The Meister's eyes were everywhere, even in this forgotten, desolate corner of Oswagonia. They hadn't even reached the alcove, and already the web was closing in. The approach would be more difficult than anticipated. The path to the Temptress was guarded, confirming her importance and the danger surrounding her operations. They were no longer just navigating the city. They were entering hostile territory. Gerrod pressed himself tighter against the cold, crumbling brickwork of a ruined shopfront, the scent of old soot and decay sharp in his nostrils. The stillness of the informants in the distance was unnatural, predatory. His initial assessment held. They were watched, anticipated. But why? How could the Meister know their target was the silk market alcove so soon after they learned of it themselves? A sliver of doubt, cold and sharp as winter ice, pierced his usual calm. He replayed the scene at the Rusty Mug, the convenient proximity of the enforcer's table, the way their voices carried despite the surrounding din, the specific mention of the alcove, a location tied to the Meister's most sensitive dealings, supposedly revealed through drunken carelessness. Split Ear's sudden loudness, the thin man's almost performative fear, the perfectly dropped name of the Temptress. Had it all been theater? His fingers brushed the smooth wood of his bow, a familiar anchor. Nature rarely laid such obvious trails unless leading prey into a snare. Had they been the prey all along? Was the overheard conversation less a stroke of luck and more a carefully baited hook cast by the Meister, or perhaps even the elusive Temptress herself, designed to draw them precisely here into this desolate, easily contained killing ground? Ace flattened himself against the damp brick beside Gerrod, squinting hard into the oppressive darkness towards the archway. His night vision wasn't elven sharp, but decades of navigating shadowy alleys and moonless rooftops had trained him to read stillness and silhouette. He recognized the posture, the way the figures hugged the deepest shadows, the almost casual readiness. It was the hallmark of Meister lookouts waiting for a target or a signal, not just random thugs loitering. "Aye, you're right," Ace breathed, the sound a low growl barely disturbing the air. "That lump under the cloak on the rooftop? Bet me axe it's Mickle the Bolt, Meister's favorite crossbowman for ambushes." He spat silently onto the debris-strewn ground. "And the pair by the arch? They've got the look of the wharf rats crew, muscle the Meister uses when he wants deniable trouble." He ran a calloused thumb along the worn grip of one of his hidden daggers. The pieces clicked together with grim certainty, aligning perfectly with Gerrod's sudden suspicion. "Damn it all," he muttered, the words rough with dawning realization. "You're right, elf? Too neat. That whole show back at the Mug, Boric and his cronies practically gift-wrapping the location?" He shook his head, anger tightening his features. "Felt wrong then. Smells like dragon shite now." They weren't just observed, they were expected. The informants weren't generic lookouts. They were positioned ambushers, regulars from the Meister's payroll. The overheard conversation hadn't been a lucky break. It was bait, skillfully dangled. They hadn't stumbled onto the trail. They'd been deliberately led down it, straight towards these waiting blades in the heart of the ruins. The trap was set. The cold reality of the ambush settled between them, tangible as the crumbling mortar beneath their fingers. Ahead, the shadowed alcove beckoned, a potential nexus point for the entire investigation, the rumored haunt of the enigmatic Temptress herself. Yet, guarding the path were the Meister's hounds, patient and poised in the darkness. Mickle the Bolt with his deadly crossbow, the wharf rats itching for violence. Gerrod scanned the ruins again, not just for threats, but for alternatives. His ranger's instincts, usually clear guides in the wild, felt muddled here amidst the broken stone and unnatural stillness. There were no game trails, no hidden streams to follow, only jagged lines of sight and potential kill zones. "If the exchange is happening," he murmured, his voice low and taut, "it will likely be soon." Under cover of deepest night. The urgency pressed against the caution born of recognizing the trap. Ace shifted his weight, the slight rasp of leather on stone loud in the silence. 3 confirmed watchers, he calculated softly, his mind working the grim arithmetic of combat. Likely more we haven't spotted. They hold the high ground and the bottleneck at that arch. Going straight in is suicide, elf. Even for us. He glanced towards the alcove. Frustration etched onto his face. But if she is meeting someone there, with those artifacts, letting that chance slip away. He didn't finish the sentence, the implication hanging heavy in the chill air. The dilemma was stark. Plunge into the obvious trap for the slim chance of confronting the Temptress or intercepting the stolen goods? Or retreat, conceding this round to the Meister, losing the lead and potentially allowing the powerful artifacts to vanish deeper into the shadows? Every moment they waited increased the risk of the exchange concluding, yet every step forward brought them closer to the waiting crossbow bolt and drawn blades. The silence stretched, broken only by the desolate wind, demanding a decision they couldn't afford to get wrong. Gerrod pressed his back against the cold stone, his keen eyes trying to pierce the gloom. The direct path was madness, a fool's errand into a preset killing field. Yet, The possibility of the Temptress arriving, perhaps with the orb or the staff, gnawed at him. A direct approach favors them, he whispered, the sound barely audible above the wind. They expect it. They hold the ground. He shifted his gaze, scanning the crumbling facades opposite them. There, the Cooperative ruin, 3rd floor. It offers a view of the arch and the approach to the alcove. We could observe. Wait. Ace grunted, his knuckles white where they gripped his axe handle. Waiting felt like surrender. Observe? He rasped, the word tight with frustration. Observe while she slips in and out like smoke, just like they said. We see shapes in the dark, maybe catch a whisper on the wind, and she's gone? With the artifacts? He shook his head, his beard bristling. If she's coming soon. This might be our only chance to see her, to act. He looked from the distant, deadly archway to the potential safety of the ruined Cooperative. The allure of direct confrontation, however risky, warred with the cold logic of survival.
The Temptress, a name spoken in fear, a specialist in arcane theft who moves like smoke and deals in death. Gerrod and Ace have found her trail, a path leading to the forgotten ruins of the Silk Market. But they are not the only ones moving in the shadows tonight. What secrets await in the Temptress's lair? And is the information they've gathered a clue or a carefully laid trap? The hunt continues in Chapter 8, Moonrat Shadows. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow the trail. The shadows are deepening.